Morning, Citylight. It is so good to be spiritually with all of you through Facebook and YouTube. So thanks for joining us. My name's Austin. I'm one of the pastors here and excited to see what God does through this morning, through his word. So cool to have those languages read, by the way. That was incredible. We're going to continue in Matthew chapter 6 on the Sermon on the Mount. This is the greatest sermon ever preached. And so let me start with this question. How many of you get hangry? And so if you don't know what that word means, it's essentially a mixture between hungry and angry. And when you are hungry, you get angry. So how many of you get hangry? Or maybe the better question is, when's the last time you got hangry? Now, I legitimately think that I might have diabetes, like an early onset or something. Like I get lightheaded, I get frustrated, I feel like tired. It is not good when I don't get stuff to eat for a while. You can ask my wife. Like normally I'm joyful and playful and fun, but when I don't eat, I'm like frustrated. I stop making jokes. The Austin you see every week is not the hangry Austin, okay? You do not want to meet that version of me. Now, Snickers, if you've seen any of their commercials, they play on this one idea, that you're not you when you're hungry. And so they argue, therefore you should go eat a Snickers and be yourself again. One of my favorite Snickers commercials is set in Asia with a bunch of ninjas. So there's all these ninjas, and then there's one that's Mr. Bean. Okay, if you're not familiar with Mr. Bean, he's clumsy, constantly makes mistakes, which is like the opposite of what a ninja is. And so they're jumping from like roof to roof, and it's elegant and it's good. And then Mr. Bean is like way behind, and he's tiptoeing, and he's knocking stuff off, and he's super loud, and he ends up falling through the roof. Okay, and he's in the middle of all these enemies, and one of his ninja buddies throws him a Snickers and says, hey, you lose focus when you're hungry. He eats the Snickers, turns back into a ninja who he really is, jumps out and escapes, and he is safe, which I love. Now, it's funny, but we've all experienced this. Hunger does something to us. That is undeniable. It often makes us less patient. Being hungry makes us less enjoyable to be around, and Snickers argues less like ourselves. And so our solution is just to keep eating, right? If you want to avoid turning into Mr. Bean, just don't let yourself get too hungry because you won't like who you turn into when you're hungry. Now, this is crucial for us to understand as we dig into what Jesus is telling us today. We're going to look at 3 verses in Matthew chapter 6 that Jesus explains of fasting. He's teaching on this idea of fasting, which, by the way, is intentionally avoiding food, intentionally being hungry, all right? Now, I would argue that a majority of our church, majority of you, can count on less than one hand how many times you have heard a sermon about fasting. But did you know that the Bible talks more about fasting than it does baptism? Okay? Jesus fasted. His disciples fasted. He calls us to fast. And so you might ask the question, well, then why don't we fast? Well, it's because we don't like being hungry. We love food and we hate being hungry. It's easy to eat and it's hard to fast. I think we're afraid of who we're going to turn into when we're hungry. We have control over our situation and our mood when we eat. We have less control when we fast. Church, we've collectively bought this idea that you're not you when you're hungry, but the Bible is going to argue today that you can be the truest version of yourself when you're hungry. We kind of buy this lie that I can read my Bible and I can read my Bible and I can pray to God and that's enough. I'm connected with Jesus. That's just fine. Why would I need fasting as another discipline? And yet Jesus is going to invite us into going deeper today through fasting. And so my goal really simply is to bring clarity and simplicity to this vague spiritual discipline called fasting, this unique way to connect with God. And so I would love to just bring clarity and simplicity. So I'm convinced this morning that if you listen and if you actually apply, that you will go deeper with Jesus than you ever would be able to without. Okay, so let's jump in. I am super excited. Verse 1, Jesus says, the first couple words, he says, and when you fast. Now, it's important to note that just like prayer last week and giving to the needy the week before, Jesus assumes that we're fasting. It's kind of just a matter of fact. It's like when you fast, and say if you fast or if you choose to. It's just when you fast, he assumes it. Second thing to notice is that when Jesus brings up fasting, he doesn't give any context. He doesn't give any background or explanation. He just jumps right into it. So he assumes not only that we're fasting, but that we know about fasting. Now, we're 2,000 years removed from this, okay? And I bet fasting is not a regular part of your life or rhythm. And so, I was asking our staff this last week, and so many of us just didn't have a good answer for what fasting is or what it looks like. The general understanding of it, but not specific or rich or beautiful. And so I bet that a majority of our church just doesn't know about fasting, which I think is a big reason that we don't actually fast, because we don't understand it. So let's explain fasting. And let's take Jesus' lead, because in this, as he's explaining fasting, what he does first is he explains what fasting isn't. So I want to give two things that fasting isn't really briefly. Number one, look at verse 16. He continues. He says, so when you fast, he says, don't look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by others. And truly I say to you, they have received their reward. And so the first thing Jesus says that fasting isn't is a religious medal that you wear for attention. Fasting is not a religious medal you wear for attention. So here's what he says. He goes, hey, don't look gloomy. Don't disfigure your face to be seen by others. What would happen is that these hypocrites, these religious leaders, these Pharisees would get to the day that they actually fast. And they wouldn't take a shower. Modern day, they wouldn't take a shower. They wouldn't put deodorant on. They wouldn't fix up their hair or do whatever, no makeup, whatever. And they would intentionally make themselves look bad. Okay, so low hygiene. And he says, don't look gloomy. Like they would disfigure their faces like they're just grumpy and hurting. Why? Because it would spark interest in conversation. Someone sees them and goes, oh my gosh, are you okay? Yeah, I'm just fasting. Oh, it's so miserable. It's so hard, but I'm just committed to God. And people would be like, wow, you're a hero in the faith. You're so amazing. And the point for them to fast wasn't to connect with God. It was to impress other people. They would intentionally make themselves look worse than they were. Now, Leviticus 23 in the Old Testament, God commands fasting once a year. So you're only supposed to fast once a year. That's the requirement on the Day of Atonement, where they would sacrifice a lamb to atone for the sins of God's people. It's a beautiful day, celebratory day. They would fast that one day. But in Luke 18, we hear that these Pharisees, these hypocrites, would actually fast twice a week. So every Monday and every Thursday would come around. Their morning routine before they would fast is to not do anything, not get ready, not make themselves look okay. They would make themselves look worse so that they would draw out attention. And guess what? Every Monday, they're walking through town, people see them. And normal people, common people, who again love God, are only fasting once a year. And they see these spiritual elites, this varsity team of people, they think that are fasting twice a week, and they want to make sure people know that they're fasting in order to impress them. It's a medal that they were wearing to impress people, and Jesus goes, that's not what fasting is. That's not the point of it. So just to be clear, church, fasting is not a religious medal that you wear for attention. Jesus doesn't want people to know that you're fasting or be impressed by it. It's between you and him. Which leads us to the second thing that Jesus says fasting isn't. Now, he continues in verses 17 and 18. He goes, but when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Okay? So there's this dynamic that we talked about, right? We don't do things for motivation, to be seen by others, for attention, for approval or affirmation. We perform, we live our lives before God, for him. He sees in secret. We don't have to make sure everyone else sees. We've covered that. And he goes, and so in light of fasting, I want you to anoint your head. I want you to wash your face. This isn't saying anything special. It's basically just normal hygiene. So just get ready for your day. Don't get fancier than you normally are when you fast, or get less than you normally are. Just be normal so no one's distracted. No one asks you why you're fasting. And he says, and specifically here, your Father sees you and rewards you. Now, the second thing I want to tell you that fasting isn't, is biblical fasting is not a weight loss strategy. Okay? Biblical fasting is not a weight loss strategy. The reward he's talking here at the end of verse 18, I'm sorry to break it to you, but it's not losing 5 pounds and making your love handles a little bit smaller. Okay, I wish that was it, but that's not the purpose of biblical fasting. Jesus cares about your health. He cares about your wellness, but the purpose of biblical fasting is not weight loss. You will not find a single passage where they fasted to lose a couple pounds and look better for summer. Okay, that's not the case. Simply put, to explain fasting, I know this isn't fancy, but it's just what it is. Fasting is abstaining from food for spiritual purposes. Fasting is abstaining from food for spiritual purposes. Now you might go, well, what about fasting from other things? Now, biblical fasting is exclusively food and drink. But I think the idea of fasting can and should be applied to other things. My wife and I found a Lent guide from the Village Church in Texas about 5 or 6 years ago. And Lent is the 40 days leading up to Easter, where we're preparing our hearts for the resurrection, the joy of it. And each week, they gave a different thing for us to give up. And so it was like meat and sugar and TV and social media and music, so that every week we would just give up one of those essential things of our week. So when I would go to open up my phone and click on Facebook, it was deleted. I couldn't obviously click on it. I would think about Jesus, right? So that was the idea. The reality is that good things that become God things turn into bad things. And so there are times when we can fast and kind of break that grip that they have on our lives and make sure we're clinging to Jesus. So biblical fasting is exclusively food and drink, but I think if you want to apply that to other things, you absolutely have the freedom to, and I would encourage you to, okay? Now, there are different types of fasting. Now that we kind of know like why fasting, let's just look at briefly what fasting might look like. There are like 7 or 8 types of fasts, but for sake of brevity and this morning and easiness to understand, we're just going to cover the 3 most common. The first type of fasting is regular fasting. This is avoiding food but not water. And so in Matthew chapter 4, Jesus fasts. It says he fasts for 40 days. And in verse 2, it says that he was hungry, which, by the way, is that like the understatement of the century? Like that's crazy. He was extremely hungry after 40 days of not eating food, but it doesn't say that he was thirsty. So we assume that Jesus continued to drink water, but he avoided food. Your body can actually only survive for a few days without water, but can survive a lot longer without food. A complete fast, that's a different type, would be avoiding food and water, and I know people in our church that have done that as well. Legends, right? My buddy and I in college would do a regular fast. We did it for 1 semester, and we did it 1 day a week, and we avoided food, and we learned a lot about Jesus, and it was great. The second type of fasting is a partial fast. So in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel and 3 other Jewish men decide to fast, but they do it by just eating vegetables and drinking water. Okay, so it wasn't a complete fast from food, a regular fast. It was partial in just eating vegetables. This could be, you can avoid certain types of food. It could be sugars or whatever you feel like is you're clinging to in order to, when you're tempted to eat that, remember Jesus, right? So hilarious. My buddy Andrew Rutten and I, when we were on college ministry in Omaha together before we got married to our wives, we decided to do a 3-day partial fast. And so all I remember is eating potatoes. Like that's all we could eat. And so for lunchtime, we would come home from work and we would literally just throw potatoes in the microwave, warm them up for 20 seconds, sit on the couch, no salt, no butter, no sour cream, no bacon bits, no cheese, and we would just sit there like and just gnaw on this potato. It was just terrible, and we complained the whole time. But I don't even know why we did it. I can't remember, but nonetheless, that's a partial fast, avoiding certain types of food, but not all of it. And the third type of fast is an occasional fast. Be a special occasion or a unique event. And so if you know the story of Esther, she's an amazing woman in the Old Testament. That is just a sweet picture of Jesus and what he did for us. But anyways, her people, the Jews, were at stake of being destroyed. So she had to go before the king. But if she was not summoned before the king, it was basically like suicide for her to go in front of him because that would be disrespectful. And yet she knows she needs to come before the king. in order to save her people. And so what she does in this special occasion is she fasts, and the rest of the Jews fast with her. It was an occasion before a special event, before a big thing, they would fast and commit to the Lord. So different things can provoke this. Like our elders fasted a year ago before we planted South Out. We prayed over leadership. Who's the right people? We prayed over timeline. When's the right time to do this? And it was a special occasion for us to fast for. So those are the three types: normal, partial, and occasional. Now hear me say this. This is crucial. It's important to see that there are not strict guidelines for fasting. There is so much freedom. Jesus just addresses the why in this passage, right? But he didn't say how often or when exactly you should. There is freedom. So just a couple ideas. Maybe you choose to fast once a week over lunch. Right? That's not too crazy. You can still have breakfast, you can still have dinner and a snack in the afternoon or something. But fasting over lunch, to say, I'm not going to eat lunch, I'm going to spend time in the Bible, and I'm going to pray more and connect deeper with Jesus. Maybe you fast one day a month, do a regular fast where you completely avoid food for one whole day every single month. Maybe you choose 1 month of the year to fast from a certain thing. Hey, in July, we're going to fast from TV, and I'm going to fast from social media. That would be a great idea, but know that there's freedom, and you can adjust and do what you feel like God is leading you to in that season. Just make sure the why is right. You're not doing it for other people. You're not doing it for a weight loss strategy. You're doing it to connect with Jesus. Now, we have a better idea of what fasting is and why we should fast, but the last thing I would want you to do right now is to just go and fast because you know that you should go do it. I would admire your readiness to obey, but I need to make one more thing very clear. Here it is. Fasting needs a purpose. Fasting needs a purpose. See, in Spiritual Disciplines of a Christian Life, Donald Whitney, legend, he writes and he argues this. He says, without a purpose for your fast, it's just a weight loss strategy. We covered that. Without a purpose for your fast, it can be a miserable, self-centered experience about your willpower. And without a purpose for your fast, every hunger pang only makes us calculate how much time we have left. Okay? If you don't have a purpose, it is not going to be enjoyable. Fasting needs a purpose. Why? Because it reminds us of why we did it. It keeps our motive pure as we're going through. Let me be clear. If you haven't fasted before, it is very difficult. If you have fasted before, you know that it is not easy. And so you need a purpose to fuel you, to motivate you, to push you through so you don't give up. When we fast for a purpose, every stomach gurgle reminds us of why we chose to do this. And so if I'm fasting for my kids to be saved someday, and I get a headache from being hungry, I remember, oh my gosh, I need to pray for them and go tell them that Jesus loves them. If I'm fasting for the nations, for more people to know Jesus, and my stomach growls, oh my gosh, I need to pray for these people that Jesus raises up missionaries to go to these specific places. If I am praying, fasting for the generosity of our church, and I drive past Chick-fil-A and I crave it, I need to pray for generous, sacrificial givers that are committed to the mission of God through our local church, right? Fasting needs a purpose. And so to make this as memorable as I can, it's kind of the meat of the sermon content, I just want to draw out 4 purposes for fasting. There are more, trust me. I think there are like 10 or so that I could lay out, but I'm just going to lay out 4. And you'll notice that they spell FAST as an acronym, okay? Easy to remember. So 4 purposes that should guide, that you can kind of pick from if you do choose to fast. Number 1, fasting to focus. Fasting to focus. There's the F, right? Now, Second Chronicles chapter 20 is where we're going to look. And it's a story of Jehoshaphat. 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Now, to get some context in here, it says in verse 2 that there's a great multitude coming against them. And in verse 3, it says they were afraid of this great multitude. And so guess what they do? It says they set their face on God and they seek God through fasting. So they decide to fast. And verse 12, as it comes, is one of my favorites. Here's what they say: for we are powerless against this great horde that is coming against us. We're powerless against this great horde that's coming against us. We don't know what to do. This is key. But our eyes are on you. We don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. So they're saying the future's unclear, but I'm going to look at a clear God who is in control. And God's response to their fast in that plea in verses 15 through 17, he says, this isn't your fight, it's mine. Hey, he gives instructions, stand firm, hold your position. You'll see the salvation of God tomorrow. We fast to focus, to set our eyes on God. Now, in this fasting, we want to focus, right, to see him and to see his will more clearly. Now, I just got a really nice camera that I'm so excited about. I'm actually starting a YouTube channel to give content out and resources and stuff that I've learned and stories that happen in my life, kind of a vlog-like, story-filled videos on a consistent basis to be able to equip our church and encourage other people all over. I'm really excited, but I don't know anything about cameras. So I'm literally, the first day as I get it, I'm trying to film Kristen, and for whatever reason, it's focused on the picture behind her, and she's like blurry. And so there's this little button on the camera that you like half push, and it focuses in on the center of the lens or what you're wanting it to focus on. And then so I pushed it, and Kristen was crystal clear, and it focused on her. And I felt like what an accurate picture of what fasting does for us. In the lens of our lives, it feels like everything else gets the focus. Everything else gets the attention, right? There's so many distractions that are going on and opinions and loud voices and all of this stuff. And yet there's this aspect of, no, I want to focus on Jesus. And there's this proverbial autofocus button called fasting that enables us to focus on Jesus, to see him clearly. It's beautiful. This is the opportunity that we get to, this proverbial autofocus button, to see him more clearly and fade the rest of everything else. Make sure he's the guy we see. Now, I want to be clear that fasting for a focus, to focus can be both general and specific. So general, maybe for you in this season, you're just convicted maybe right now and going, I don't feel like I've been focusing on Jesus. If I'm being honest, the lens of my life is focused on everything else in the background. Jesus is right in front of me, and yet he's completely blurry because I'm not focused on him. Maybe you're going, I don't think about him often. He is not guiding my decisions. He's not the first line that I run to. I just want to focus more on Jesus. I would encourage you to fast to focus on him. And it can also be specific, like in 2 Chronicles 20 with Jehoshaphat. He had a specific thing happening where he didn't know what to do, and he says, but I'm going to look to you. I'm going to focus on you. And so for you, maybe it's just as simple as, I don't know what to do after college. I don't know what job to accept, or I don't know what college to go to. Maybe it is, I don't know should I date this guy or should I marry this person? We can fast specifically to ask God, I don't know what to do, but I'm going to look to you. Maybe it's, should I move from this place or should I accept this job or whatever it may be, a big decision, and we're going, I'm going to fast to focus on you, God, and to make sure I'm making my decision in light of who you are. We fast to focus. Second thing is we fast for appetite. We fast for appetite. Now, from Matthew 7, just flip back a page or two. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus fasts. We talked about this earlier, right, in a regular fast. 40 days, he doesn't eat any food. Verse 2 explains that. Then verse 3 comes, and Satan comes on the scene, and he tempts Jesus. And how does he tempt him? He knows what's going on. He knows Jesus is hungry, and so he uses his hunger. And he says, hey, Jesus, you see that stone? You should turn it to bread. I know you're hungry. That'd be the perfect solution. And Jesus' response in verse 4 is amazing. He says, man must not live on bread alone. That's not the thing that's going to fuel my soul. No. Man must live on every word of God. It's beautiful. So here's the fundamental truth, Citylight. We never stop consuming. We consume information, we consume food, we consume attention and opportunities. It's like we have this never-ending appetite that constantly is consuming. And Jesus in Matthew 4, verse 4, shows us that fasting prevents us from filling that appetite with food so that we have to look elsewhere to fill the appetite, right? Man must not live on bread alone. That's not going to quench my hunger. That's not going to satisfy me. I want to live on every word of God. I'm going to go run to the thing that's actually going to satisfy me. Jesus is showing us this. So with our never-ending appetite, if we stop consuming food, it makes us search for something different. And the hope is that we would search and find the satisfying person of Jesus, who in John 6 says, I'm the bread of life. I'm the one that satisfies eternally. We would starve ourselves from the world to feast on Jesus. We would neglect to fulfill our hunger for food in order to intensify our hunger for God. That's the goal in fasting, for our appetite. Now, I'm sure that every single one of us has experienced this. This idea of, I just don't know if I'm very hungry for God, right? When I first came to know Jesus, like actually walking with him, was about 19 years old. And I remember that first season of being a believer, I could not get away from the Bible. Like I was reading the Bible every day for hours a day. I couldn't get enough of it. I was so hungry. And now, 9 years later, it's like I'm so convicted. It feels like I'm just opening my Bible when I need to prepare for a sermon or I need to sit down with discipleship. And it's like I miss the days when I would just open this up and go, Jesus, speak. Like I want you, and I don't want to have to tell anyone about. I just want you, not for anyone else to know, just for me and you. I miss the days when I was hungry for his word. I remember my senior year of college, I was so hungry to share the gospel with other people. I was so excited. I had such an appetite for it. I mean, I spent my 21st birthday downtown Lincoln sharing the gospel. True story. And I'm going, and now it feels like I'm just not passionate about sharing the gospel other than when I'm preaching on stage, you know? It's like, I miss those days where no one could interact with me without hearing the gospel. Maybe you feel the same way. Like you just know I'm not hungry for God right now. I have to ask you, is that you? Are you hungry from God, or are you full from this world? And so what do you do? What do we do to spark that hunger again, to fill that appetite and go, Jesus, I want you? We fast. We fast like Jesus did and go, no, I'm not going to live on bread alone. I'm going to live on the world. We fast, and it jumps our appetite back for God who truly satisfies. Number 3, the third purpose we fast is over sin. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 7, to give some context, Israel has been disobedient to God. They have ran away from him. They have worshiped other gods and turned away from God. And yet enemies are coming against them. And they know they don't have the favor of God because they've ran away from him. And so they're afraid. They know they're disobedient. They're convicted. And it says in chapter 7, verse 6 in 1 Samuel, it says they fasted and they said, we have sinned against the Lord. So let me ask you this. This is raw. Do you feel numb about your sin? Like, at first it was like it just pained you and you hated it, and I can't believe I did that. And now over time it's just kind of become normalized and you just don't feel it as much. I've played guitar for about 15 years, and I remember when I first started playing, my fingers, like they would bleed and they would hurt so bad because of those strings pushing them down. And yet now 15 years later, I can play guitar for hours and it doesn't hurt. Why? Because my fingers form these little calluses at the end of them. It's like what used to hurt doesn't hurt anymore. And in Matthew 13, verse 15, Jesus says, you have calloused hearts. In other words, hey, what used to hurt you, what used to pain you, now you don't feel anymore. Now you can experience it. You don't feel anything. It's going, man. And I can just admit, I feel like my heart is calloused towards several pieces and parts of sin in my life, and I don't want it. So here's my question. What do you do when you know it's wrong, but you don't feel bad about it? What do you do? In Romans 6, verse 1, Paul says, so should we just keep sinning since Jesus keeps forgiving? And he says in verse 2, absolutely not. But I remember first reading that verse as an early new believer and going, who in the world would sin just because they know that Jesus is going to forgive it? But again, 9 years later, and I'm realizing, oh my gosh, that's me. There have been sin that I fell into, thoughts that I've lingered on too long, something I looked at I should. And it's like, I walk away from that. I know it's sin. I don't feel any grief in my heart. And I just go, well, Jesus paid for that. And it's like this normalized, apathetic response to God's grace. And listen, as dark as that is, it's actually true. Like, listen to this news. Jesus died for the sins that you feel horrible about and the sins that you feel nothing about. Jesus died for the sins that you have been hiding for in shame for years. Jesus died for the sins that you feel nothing about, that you don't feel broken about. Jesus died for the sins that we participate in over and over and over and over again. Jesus died for the sins that we are broken over and not broken over. It makes no distinction. He paid for it all. It's a glorious truth. And if I'm honest, I hate that I take advantage of that truth. Make no mistake, church, if you've trusted in Jesus, he has paid for every one of your sins. And I hate that I've taken advantage of that truth. Like this glorious truth that because I've trusted in the free grace of Jesus, that I get this beautiful, unchanging relationship with God, that he no longer looks differently at me because of my sin, that nothing can change the way that God sees me or God sees you because our trust in him, that it's unconditional love, unrelenting passion for us. I hate that I've taken that good news and used it to keep on sinning. To give me a free pass to not feel broken over my sin. And listen, I'm willing to bet that I'm not the only one. I'm willing to bet that I'm not the only one that struggles with this. Like using God's grace like a no-limit credit card that someone else is going to pay. I just keep spending and spending and spending with no concern for how important it was or looking at the sale rack. I just keep spending and buying because I know that someone's going to pay for it and it's going to be okay and it won't come back on me. What do we do? What do we do if that's us? We fast. In Joel chapter 2, God says, return to me. Come back to me. How? With fasting. Return to me with all your heart, with mourning, with weeping, with fasting, because I'm gracious and merciful and kind. Fasting is saying, I'm going to ask you, God, to convict me. I'm going to ask you, God, to let me feel the weight of my sin. And if that describes you, I know that's kind of scary, right? To ask God to let you feel your sin. And yet it's the most beautiful thing we can do, because in the moment that we feel the weight of that sin, we go, oh my gosh, Jesus took it off and he paid for every single ounce of it. We are blown away at what he has done for us. Last thing I'll say on fasting over sin is that in Nehemiah chapter 1, Nehemiah fasts for his own sin, and it also says that he fasted for the sin of the people. So he mourns. And so I just want you to know that we fast over our own sin, but there is also fasting biblically over the sin of the world. And so as we see racism, as we see injustice, as we see an innocent black man gunned down by two white guys because of racial assumption, we mourn and we fast and we beg God to change that and let that be different. Let his earth be more like his kingdom, right? As we see loved ones, family members, friends walk away from the gospel, walk in sin, what do? We fast. We mourn over it. We beg God to change that. We fast over sin. And the fourth and final purpose for fasting is fasting and trembling. Fasting and trembling. And so this is in Judges chapter 20 that we're going to look here. Judges chapter 20, verses 18 through 28. To get some context, in verse 18, they have an enemy coming against them, and it says they inquired of the Lord. They end up going to battle, and they lose 22,000 men that day from battle. And so they weep, they mourn, they're sad. They go back to God, and they inquire of him again in verse 23. And in that day, when they went to go battle, they lose another 18,000 men. So just to get this in perspective, 2 days, 40,000 men died. They don't know what to do. They're trembling. They're afraid. And so what do? They come back one last time. Third time's a charm, right? And guess what's different? It says in verse 26, they fasted to the Lord. They didn't just inquire, they fasted. And God finally answered, and he gave them victory over this unbeatable foe. And so listen, we fast when we fear and don't have a way forward. We fast when we fear and don't have a way forward. I've tried option 1 and 2 and failed miserably. God, I need you. God, I'm trembling and I want you to handle this. You know what's unique about our hearts is that when we don't have control over life in general, we try to control some little things, even if they're small. I can control this finance account, I can control this friendship or this project on my house, and it's like we just want to just have some sense of stability and control, and yet fasting is going, no. I'm throwing my hands up in the midst of my chaos to the God who actually is in control. There's no way I can solve this on my own, and so I trust you, God. And so Citylight, what are you afraid of? What are you trembling for right now? Maybe it's COVID-19 stuff. I know stuff is relaxing, but we're still nervous about it. And so I just have to compel you, don't keep yourself busy trying to plan every way that the stock market can go and your finances can move. Don't distract yourself and act like everything's just fine. And do not be deceived as if you have any sense of control over what's happening. Throw your trembling hands up to God through fasting. He is a refuge. He cares about you. He loves you, and he is there with you now. We fast in trembling. And so to give just application challenge, this is so exciting. This Wednesday coming up, I want to invite our whole church into fasting over lunch. Just a regular fast from food, but just for one lunch hour. So rather than eating, you would come and you'd have your Bible and you'd pray. And I would love, if you feel compelled, I would love to invite us all as a church to fast. What's the purpose? I specifically was praying about this, and I feel like we need to pray. We need to fast for appetite, a hunger for God. We can all admit that we have feasted on the world and we have starved ourselves from God, and I want us to pray to flip that, just to pray, God, would you make us hungry people for you? Second challenge is to fast in your city group. It's a great group of people to be able to fast with. It's hard to fast, like we said, but being in community helps a ton. Would encourage you to do that. So pick a purpose and do it with a close group of friends, maybe in your huddle, however you want to do it. And third is to pray about fasting intermittently as a plan. Going through and saying, I want to fast, maybe it's, like I said, one day a month or 1 month a year from a certain aspect of my life. Would love to invite you to rotate through different seasons and reasons in that. So, to focus for appetite over sin or in trembling. And so let me close with this. Let me leave you with this. In Matthew chapter 9, Jesus is questioned about fasting. And they go, hey, Jesus, like John's disciples fast and the Pharisees fast, and why don't you and your disciples fast? And Jesus says, you don't fast when the bridegroom is with you. He says, he's calling himself the bridegroom, and he says, but I'm going to leave, the bridegroom's going to be taken away, and then my people will fast. So what he's getting to right now is that when they're with the bridegroom, it's reason to celebrate, not mourn and weep through fasting or whatever it may be. But he goes, I'm going to leave someday. I'm going to die and be with my Father in heaven. I'm going to come back. But my people, they're going to fast when I'm gone because they're homesick. It's this idea of a homesickness for God, wanting him again. Now fast forward over to Revelation 19. And there's this angel that just declares the truth and says, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of God in all eternity. So you fast forward, the bridegroom is gone. We are fasting when he's gone because we're homesick for heaven. We're homesick for Jesus. And you fast forward to Revelation 19. It says, blessed are those who are invited to this marriage supper. Friends, there will be this supper, this feast in heaven where Jesus is completely unhindered with us, our bridegroom forevermore. No sin, no tears, no shame, no fear, no trembling, no, just Jesus and just his people praising in all different languages from all different nations. We're praising him at this huge marriage reception, this feast. And so fasting is saying, I'm hungry, but supper's coming. I am hungry, but supper's coming. It's not about weight loss. It's not about a religious badge. It's not about showing people how committed I am to Jesus. No, it's about Jesus, his commitment to me. I'm homesick for him. It's about focus and appetite and sin and trembling. We fast and say we're hungry. Well, we know that supper's coming. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you. You have been gracious to us in every single way, and we haven't deserved an ounce of it. And so I pray, God, I just want to first confess that we have not taken fasting seriously. We have avoided it. We've been okay with not understanding it. And we pray that you would well up in us this desire to fast, to see this beauty, that we can fast to focus, to see you more clearly. We can fast for appetite, to say, God, I want to hunger for you more than the world. God, we get to fast over sin. God, I hate that I'm numb and we are numb over sin. We want to feel the weight of it so we can see the grace that you've actually lavished on us. And God, we fast when we're trembling, when we're afraid and we don't have any control, and we know that you're in control, God. And so help us, convince us as we choose to fast as a way to connect with you, God, that you're there, that yes, we're hungry, but there are purposes for this. There are deeper intimacies that we can experience. And we say that supper's coming. There's a feast. So we'll starve ourselves now from the crumbs of this world to enjoy the feast of heaven with you, Jesus. We love you. Compel us, Jesus. Change us, Jesus. Let us fast.